Hello, Soundies. Welcome to our Sound for Video session. Today is the 7th of July, 2024. It's great to have you here, especially given the topic. We're going to talk about WAV files, audio files. it's not the kind of thing that most people get super excited about, but here we're all just trying to be better mixers, and so we're going to talk about it. We're going to dive in a little bit of depth just so you understand what that's all about. Let's hop on over to our agenda for today, and this is what we'll talk about. First of all, as always, the Sound for Video sessions are a workshop that go along with our courses over at school.learnlightandsound.com. And we did announce last week, just as a reminder for those who haven't checked it out yet, we do have a new free course on how to choose gear for your live stream. That's over at the school. You can get that one for free. And you can sign up for the school. We will also, if you opt into the emails, that will also alert you to all of these Sound for Video sessions. And you can also submit questions ahead of time. So we are very careful about spam. We don't do spam. We don't sell, except for when we release a new course. We will send you a single email and say, hey, we have a new course. This is what it's about. If you're interested, come check it out, period. So you don't have to worry about spam there. All right. For today, we're going to talk about things that you need to know about WAV files, and you might be thinking to yourself, well, I think I know everything I need to know about WAV files, don't I? Well, maybe, maybe not. We'll go into a little detail. There are some little things that can trip you up every once in a while. I've had some common questions, and one of probably the most common questions I've had is, hey, Curtis, I have a Zoom F6, for example, and I recorded a long podcast, and it broke it up into files. Why, and how do I fix that, and what can I do? So we'll talk a little bit about that today, and then we'll go over to the chat for some questions and answers after that. All right, so let's go ahead and jump in, and we're going to talk first about what is a WAV file. So if you'd like to flex and tell us everything you know about WAV files, put it in the chat. Would love to hear your perspective on that, but here's a short version. WAV is an audio file format standard for storing an audio bit stream on personal computers. That's really kind of the boiled down definition of what a WAV file is. And historically, this was developed and published in 1991 by Microsoft, jointly by Microsoft and IBM. And I think one of the more important things to know about WAV files, and I've always assumed that, we had compressed formats, many of which are lossy. And by lossy, what I mean is that they actually sacrifice some audio quality, hopefully not too much, but some audio quality in an effort to make a smaller file that gets stored on a disk or wherever you store it. I always assumed that WAV was always uncompressed. That was an assumption that I made, but just keep that in mind because I think a lot of us assume that as well. And I figured, MP3 and AAC are lossy formats. They're compressed formats where they sacrifice some audio quality to achieve a smaller file size. But what's important to understand is that WAV is actually a wrapper. It's essentially a container. It itself is not what encodes the audio. A WAV is a wrapper, and inside of there's a data chunk with the encoded audio. And what's interesting is that you can actually put different types of data chunks in a WAV file. Usually, WAV files contain audio in an uncompressed linear pulse code modulation format. You'll often see this abbreviated to LPCM or just PCM. And this is an uncompressed format. So this is a lossless format. In other words, they're not sacrificing audio quality to encode it into a file. Okay, so that's the first thing. And almost in most circumstances, that is what WAV files contain. So they have uncompressed original audio as it was converted by the analog to digital converter from the recorder or whatever you're using, audio interface. Interestingly, just a kind of a side note, audio CDs, do you remember those? They're little discs. They also use linear pulse code modulation at 44.1 kilohertz sample rate and 16-bit, except they use a different wrapper. They use one called Redbook audio as opposed to WAV. They're both wrappers, and then you can put the data in an encoded format, in this case LPCM, into that wrapper. And what the wrapper does is it defines for whatever player is going to play that back, whether it's an app on your computer or in the case of audio CDs, it could be a CD player. The wrapper defines and tells the player or the app that you're running on your computer, hey, here are the details about what's in here, and here's how to use it. Here's its sample rate, here's blah, 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 etc. So there's some metadata there, in essence. But as I mentioned, WAV files can actually contain compressed audio data formats as well. Less common, but it can be done as well per the specification. As I mentioned, most of the time, almost all of the time, they contain linear PCM audio. So that's why we typically use them in production sound. When we're trying to capture the highest quality we can. And then from there, in post-processing, we want to start with the highest quality that we possibly can. And then when we export, often, for example, say for YouTube, usually the audio gets converted into AAC, which is a compressed format. So it uses less space, but it does a pretty good job of maintaining most of the quality. As I mentioned before, the WAV file header, so the WAV file consists of a few things. There's a file header, and then there are the data chunks with all of the information in it, the encoded audio and other things, incidentally. That file header tells the player or the app what's contained within the data chunks and in what format, so that it's aware. All right. Now, the interesting thing about WAV files is the way they were designed, they actually are backwards compatible because the spec requires applications to ignore any data chunks that they don't understand. So if you have an older player that opens a WAV file and it looks in the header and it says, well, I understand this and this and this and this. I know what to do with all that, but I don't understand this other thing here, then it just ignores that. So you may not get the full benefit of everything that happens to be in that WAV file, but it should be able to play it at a very basic level under most circumstances. What this means is that WAV format can be extended, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. WAV files can contain some simple metadata like ID3 tags. So if you have ever produced a podcast, for example, you probably are familiar with ID3 tags. This is where you can put metadata in the file itself. So you can say, for example, this podcast was by this person, it is this genre, or maybe music. You can put ID3 tags on music files as well. It's on this album, this was the year that it was published, so on and so forth. So that's what ID3 tags are. So you can include that in a WAV file. But WAV files had some limitations, and so later on, we saw an extension to the WAV specification called broadcast WAV format. And this is an extension that almost all of our recorders today for video production use this format, broadcast WAV, or BWF. And it's used obviously in motion picture, radio, television production, all of those. So it's probably the most common format right now. The file extension will generally still be .wav, but technically it's actually using this broadcast WAV format. This adds a few things. Number one, it adds the ability to store time code, and it also has a much richer implementation for storing metadata, so you can store more information. So for example, on a lot of our recorders today, we can put cue markers. So if we want to drop a marker somewhere during a recording to remind us to come back to that point for whatever reason, we can push a button on our recorder or our audio interface, and it will put in that file a marker. And that's an example of the type of metadata that you can store in there. Now, there is a huge, huge limitation to WAV and broadcast WAV files, and that is a 4 gigabyte max data chunk size. That is to say, you cannot record a file longer than 4 gigabytes in a WAV or a broadcast WAV file, period. So that's where I get those questions. That's where people come back to me and say, hey, I recorded 18 channels for an hour, and my recorder ended up breaking the audio file into multiple files. What do I do? Well, most of the recorders have this implemented in a pretty good way. And so it's literally just a matter of taking all those files, dropping them into a digital audio workstation timeline in order, and then you can export that as a single file, as one much larger file if you wanted to do that, if for whatever reason you wanted to get it back into one file. Or if you're just putting it into a nonlinear editor, a video editing app, you can just drop them all into the timeline right in sequence, put them right next to each other, and you shouldn't lose a single sample. So that's how it should work. Some people have said that they've run into situations where they're getting a blip or a crackle or something like that, and you may just need to put, normally that shouldn't happen if it's implemented well on your recorder, but if it does, you can usually just put a fade or a very, very tiny crossfade, and that should normally take care of that issue. So that's one of the things that we're up against as limitation. And in fact, we see this. I mean, even my Sound Devices 888 records to WAV format or broadcast wave format. However, there is a solution, and that is what is called RF64. So RF64, what is that? RF64 is a broadcast wave format compatible multi-channel audio format, enabling file sizes to exceed 4 gigabytes. So you can get bigger files. And this spec was formalized by the European Broadcast Union and ITU, so some standards organizations. So there were some other formats that were introduced early on to do a similar type thing. At this point in 2024, RF64 seems to be the direction that pretty much the industry is headed, largely because it's been formalized by EBU and ITU. All right, so a little bit more about RF64. It is designed for multi-channel sound. In broadcasting, you can record up to 18 surround channels plus a stereo mix. It is, of course, still based on the Microsoft Wave format, so it's an extension of that essentially. It can support file sizes larger than 4 gigabytes. In fact, at least the theoretical maximum is 16 exabytes in a single file. If you're recording that much sound, I'd be really interested to understand what your project is about. One important thing, though, is that to support RF64, the file system to which you are recording must also support files that can be larger than 4 gigabytes in size. So, for example, if you're using FAT, or file allocation table file system, you need to actually use a different file system than that to record RF64 if you're going to record something larger than 4 gigabytes. So it has to be the audio format, RF64, plus the file system that support these larger files. So you have to have both. As it turns out, most modern devices that record, for example, to SD cards or other types of removable media, most of them are using exFAT at this point. And the advantage of exFAT as a file system is that it can support files larger than 4 gigabytes, but it also has some downsides or some trade-offs. It is not a journaled file system, which is to say that without getting into all the details of what a journaled file system is, they're generally more reliable. They're less likely to lose data, and restoring data is easier when you have a journaled file system. But what exFAT is made for removable media primarily. And the idea is that they wanted to make something that was very, very fast and could handle very, very large files. So most cameras, for example, are using the exFAT file system. Just kind of some information to hold on to there. Some other things about RF64, it's transparent to broadcast wave format. So in other words, it's basically using all of the same things, all of the same definitions in the file header that we were talking about earlier. It uses the .wav file extension. So just by looking at the file extension, you may not be able to tell whether it's an RF64 file or not. There are just a few backwards compatibility limitations. For the most part, it's going to work, and most nonlinear or most digital audio workstations and nonlinear editing apps, video editing apps today can read RF64 files. But one thing that they have some limitations on is those cues or those markers I was talking about earlier. When you press a button on your recorder to try and to just drop a metadata marker at that point in the recording, there are some limitations there. With RF64, they've also defined R64M, which is a marker chunk specification. Not all of the manufacturers have picked that up yet and are supporting it. And in fact, if we switch on over to the Mac for just a moment here, here is the SD card from my Sound Devices 888. And as it turns out, let me just show you this. The Sound Devices 888 does support RF64. So when you're setting up what you want to record to each of the drives or the media within your Sound Devices 8 series recorder, you can choose broadcast wave format, or you can choose RF64. If you do, you'll note here that most DAWs support RF64. Some nonlinear editors do not. It is recommended to check, of course, beforehand, but it also says that the 8 series Q marks are not supported when RF64 is selected, meaning that at least at the time of this documentation's printing, that Sound Devices had not yet implemented the marker spec, the new marker spec that comes along with RF64. And in fact, if we look over here at disk utility, here's the SD card from my Sound Devices 888 that was actually formatted in the 888, and you can see that it's using the exFAT file system. So that enables it. It's very small, but it enables you to, that's what enables it to record larger than 4 gigabyte files in addition to the RF64 format. Okay. Let's pause there. That's a lot. Let's go to the chat and see what questions or comments you have. Okay, so Matt has a correction here for me. Not true. IBM gets credited because of their contract, but Microsoft did all the work. Okay, fair enough. If you edit, though, it will drop the unknown chunks, so using older software is okay for reading, but not for editing. Good point. Thank you, Christopher. So keep an original if that's important to you. Mark asks, in Fairlight, to get the best audio, should I use AAC codec in renders? Should I not use AAC codec in renders? Also, bitrate strategy and track data rate recommendations. Okay, lot here, actually, Mark. You can actually upload, for example, to YouTube. Again, I don't know where exactly your deliverable is going to. If you're working in broadcast, they're going to have specific specifications for you. So they may not even want AAC at all. They may want wave format uncompressed. Typically, when I export for YouTube, I am exporting to the AAC codec at the highest bitrate that's available. And that's usually what I do without a problem. Audio quality-wise, I have never had an audience member contact me and say, well, that doesn't sound, it sounds like you compressed that with AAC. It's not good. So very few people under normal circumstances can tell the difference. So that's not usually a huge issue. On the other hand, for YouTube in particular, you can upload massive Apple ProRes files with uncompressed wave audio connected to them. But what happens is when you upload them, they convert them into the codecs that they use to feed or to stream that video and that audio back to the audience. So they're going to encode it to AAC anyway. So I would actually do it yourself. I normally do it myself and use the highest bit rate possible. That's usually my strategy.
I think this is a clarification.
Okay, there are many times video with audio tracks that I produce. Yes, of course. Yeah, and when you export from Resolve, in fact, I'll get that started up here and we'll take a look at it in just a moment because DaVinci Resolve takes a while to open. Shoji, what's the difference between LPCM and PCM? I don't know, and I don't know that there is a difference. I think they just shorten the acronym sometimes, but technically it's a linear pulse code modulation, LPCM. I think that's just an abbreviation. All right, well, let's just see here. If I open up DaVinci Resolve, we're on the Mac, yep. If I go to the Deliver tab, to the Audio tab, here I would normally choose AAC, and I would choose the highest bit rate, which is 320 kilobits per second. And I usually leave the sample rate at 48 kilohertz. So for you, Mark, that's how I typically do this. Okay, Grant, is there any notable quality difference between a WAV file versus an AIFF file? AIFF is another container that was specified by Apple. I don't know all the details, but AIFF is also, again, as I say, normally contains uncompressed audio. So the differences are largely going to be in what metadata can be stored. And I don't know all the details about AIFF. In the past, even they're still in some use today, but we saw AIFF files more often in professional audio workflows, and we still see it some, but I often see nowadays mostly WAV files. So I wouldn't say there's a quality difference. No, they're both uncompressed formats. Matt gives us some historical context here. 4 gigabytes in 1999 was so huge. Sorry, 1991. That like the original IBM was 640K when most computers had 8 to 16K. Yeah, so even drives, the first, I think the FAT file system initially couldn't even support 2 gigabytes. I think it was extended later to support up to 2 gigabytes. And then they eventually extended it to 4 gigabytes. And now essentially they've moved on to new file formats. But yeah, there were some limitations there. And when it was specified, that made sense. AIFF was an Apple file format that utilized the IFF interchange file format from Commodore. Interesting. They borrowed that from Commodore. Some pretty fun historical stuff here. Shoji, by the way, I had a Commodore 64, my first computer, and what was remarkable about the Commodore 64 at the time was that in terms of its audio capabilities, they were pretty well ahead of what the PCs were doing at the time. That changed, obviously there was plenty of changes over the years, but I remember that being a pretty impressive feature of the Commodore 64. All right, from Shoji, what sample rate and bit depth do you select on your sound devices recorders for a 24p video film project? 99.9% of the time, I choose a 24-bit bit depth and a 48 kilohertz sample rate for recording dialogue. If I'm recording sound effects, I will increase the sample rate usually to 96 kilohertz. That's usually where I do that. What modern NLE does not support RF64 these days? I don't know. Haven't done that test, Christopher. Good question, though. But if you're going to be using RF64, make sure you test your workflow before you get into a big project, just so that you don't find yourself in trouble. Christopher says, for YouTube, I export H.265 with LPCM audio. YouTube is going to recompress everything always, so having uncompressed audio skips a generation loss. Okay. Good idea there. In Resolve, how do I split a poly wave file into individual tracks? Robert, we have a specific video on how to do that on my main YouTube channel. So if you type in Curtis Judd split poly wave DaVinci Resolve, you will have a tutorial that walks you exactly through what you just asked. And I hope that works for you. AIFF was made because Apple didn't want to use Microsoft formats. Probably, yes. Wave can also be used with ADM for objects metadata. So when you're doing surround or Dolby formats. Cool. Thank you, Sheriff Logs. All right. Why is it that when editors export for me AAF files from DaVinci Resolve, it fails to work in my Pro Tools HD12 windows, and yet when they use Premiere Pro, it works well? Yet we check everything. I could not answer that. I could not answer that for you. I'm sorry. It's just something I don't have experience with yet. Perhaps someone else here in the community can answer that for you. Yes, my email address is available on my YouTube channel. If you go to Curtis Judd on YouTube and you go under the details on the channel, you can get my email address there. But if it's that question, I probably can't. Perhaps someone else here in the community can answer that. All right. Is that everything?
There's a can of worms question.
Okay, let's open a can of worms because we are done with wave format for now. Fachiri, what does everyone think about Adobe's terms of service now, by the way? I'll share my opinion, my humble opinion on this, which is driven largely by economics and other things too. I don't subscribe to any of the Adobe products anymore as of today. Actually, it's been a while. I canceled my Adobe Audition, which was the last app I was licensing via Creative Cloud earlier this year. Can't remember exactly when, but it was before this whole flap about Adobe taking anything that you create in any of their apps and using that to train their AIs. So it was before that. For me, it wasn't worth, or I was doing an experiment at least to make sure that it wasn't worth maintaining that subscription, because the subscription was awfully expensive and the app didn't seem to be, it was doing everything I needed it to do, and they weren't really adding a lot of new useful features to it. They were adding some things here and there, but not anything of substance for my workflows at least. And so I didn't feel that it was worthwhile to keep paying money for it. So their new terms of service, I think there needs to be an opt-out for everyone. And Figma is actually something that audio people don't necessarily use, but it's a design app on the web. They just announced that they will be training their artificial intelligence algorithms on anything you produce in their tool unless you opt out. So you can opt out using the settings, at least in theory. They tell you can. I don't know. I think that there is quite a quagmire out there, and in the United States at least, legally, the implications of AI have not really been tested, at least not extensively yet. To me, there are a lot of questions about copyright in general, that if an AI goes out to the internet and is trained on all of the copyrighted content that's out there, and then uses that to provide answers to other people without citing the sources, to me, that seems like a copyright infringement. But I'm not an attorney, so I don't really know. And I don't think it's been tested in the courts yet. So anyway, those are some thoughts there. All right, from Wild Ride Films, what are the different audio formats that support 32-bit float audio? Broadcast wave format and RF64 can both support 32-bit float. Hampton says, how would you place compressed audio in a WAV file? How would one tell that a WAV file contains compressed audio? Other than DSD, not compressed, and LPCM, what audio types can be put in a WAV file? I believe you can actually put MP3 in a WAV file, and it has... I don't know the answer to all your questions, Hampton, but evidently there are some apps at least on the Windows platform, where you can take a WAV file and compress it and keep it in WAV format, but you've essentially taken the audio data chunks and compressed them to another encoding format. And I believe MP3 is one of them. Although I would say so I think you're going to need, in essence, I would say that Wave Agent that used to be available from Sound Devices, I think probably still is available, but they have not been updating it. Might have been able to, and might still be able to read that. It isn't able to. It is not able to process 32-bit float, and I think they've kind of abandoned that app a while ago, realizing, hey, this is costing us quite a bit of money to maintain this, and we're not selling it. So I'm assuming that was the reasoning behind it, but that might be one that can tell you. Might be worth checking. All right, thanks for the input, Curtis. Kind of early into the stream for that question, but I just wanted to ask LOL. No, that's a fine question. The thing is I wouldn't be surprised if Resolve is going to start doing that pretty soon too. They're going to start taking the content, especially on the free version, and trying to train their AIs on that. And it may already be. I don't know. I haven't looked at their terms of service in detail to know that, but I wouldn't be surprised. Christopher says another big problem with AI training, maybe not for visual or audio, is the info it's pulling from actually correct? Lots of cases already using fake info and getting folks in trouble. Yes. In fact, I asked ChatGPT to tell me to write a bio on me, and it got several facts wrong, blatantly wrong. It said that I had, what's the name of the site that has training courses? I think, yeah, it said that I was popular because I had several Udemy courses. I don't have a single Udemy course. So yeah, the problem with an AI is it doesn't have, at least the large language models that we're using today, don't have a means of being able to, at least not yet, they're not really being critical about what information they take in and assume is correct. So, all right, Shoji, at 48 kilohertz, 24-bit, how large are your SD cards for your sound devices units? I'm using 32 gigabyte cards. And incidentally, if you'll give me just a moment here, there is a very handy tool that I'd like to show you all. Let's go to the Mac here. So if I come into the support page over at Sound Devices, there's an audio calculator right here. And if I say I have a 32 gigabyte card and I record in WAV format, 48 kilohertz, 24-bit, I can choose my number of tracks. Let's say do a 5-track. It'll tell me how much recording time I can get here. Let me make that a little bigger so you can all see. So that audio calculator is just right here on the side. What a great little tool that is. So it tells you the data rate and how much recording time you can expect. So if I have a 32 gigabyte card recording 48 kilohertz, 24-bit WAV with 6 channels, I can record 10 hours and 17 minutes. So this can be a useful tool if you're trying to figure out exactly what size card you need and how many channels you're going to be recording.
Where is that again?
This is over at Sound Devices. Let's go back. So if I come to the Sound Devices page, I click on Support, scroll down. It's on the left-hand side here. Pretty handy tool. All right, Robert Harker says, the AI and ownership Adobe issues are red herrings. The big issue is the perpetual royalty-free license of your footage that the Adobe Terms of Service grants. So basically, they're taking all of your assets, or at least your video footage. I don't know if that also includes audio. So that's problematic as well. Basically, they're taking everything you put to their apps. Not a fan. Just because an app says it supports WAV, many applications assume it's just LPCM and don't support other embedded audio codecs. Also true. Again, if the app that's reading it doesn't understand the file header and the specific tags that are used in the file header, it will ignore that. So it is possible that some apps would not be able to open a WAV file that has an audio bit stream that's encoded in something other than linear PCM. That is true. ChatGPT and other large language models are just trying to predict the succeeding words so they don't actually know the answer. Yeah, exactly. Thanks for the Sound Devices recording time calculator. Thank you to Sound Devices for that. That is a great little tool. Mark says, looks like Wave Agent hasn't been updated since 2013 for Mac and 2007 for Windows. Yeah, I think that sucker has been end of life for quite some time. Yeah, I would say 11 years plus. It's been a while. All right, well, that's everything I have on Wave. We didn't have any questions that were submitted ahead of time, so we can play. We can talk about whatever questions you have. We can explore other things. I did have somebody submit a question, not for the Sound for Video session, but we can go work on that if if nobody has any other questions. If you do have a question, though, if you could tag it with @CurtisJuddAudio, that way it'll make it easy for Danny to spot it, and we'll bring it up here on the screen and talk it through. All right. So the question that was submitted by someone who doesn't even know about these live streams is they have a Zoom F6 and they upgraded the firmware on it to the 2.0 firmware, which I believe is the latest. Let's take a look here. Version 2.0 is the latest, last I checked. So first thing we're going to check is that the latest firmware? So we will go to Zoom Corp on our Mac. You can pull this up. Okay, I don't really love the way they've reorganized their site here, but we'll come in here. I think it's funny that they're showing their F control on top of a Zoom F8 and the F control is no longer available, but okay. We'll go into the Zoom F6 and we will choose specs and no, it's not the specs and details. I think it's the support and downloads I want. All right, so firmware is version 2.0. So we do have the latest firmware. Okay, great. Good to know. So with that, we can go back to the main camera for now. I am going to get into my F6 here. Oh, it's been a while since I powered on, so I had to reset the date.
What's the question you're trying to answer?
So the question, I'm getting to that.
Okay.
Danny asked what the question is I'm trying to answer. So the question was, hey, I upgraded my firmware to version 2, and then the next day I did my very first recording with a line level signal. And what I found is that when I plugged the same line level signal into different inputs on the F6, they registered at different levels on the meters. That's interesting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come into the first channel, and I apologize, I don't have an overhead camera set up to show you this, but I'm going to talk you through it. So first I come into the channel menu, and I'm going to go into the source selection, and I'm going to change it to line. So for the person that asked the question, I'll refer them back to this live stream so they can see this or hear this. They asked what line pH is. Line pH is line level plus phantom power. And if you're recording from any sort of other mixer or mixing board, you do not want to turn on the phantom power. So you just want line. That's the first thing. Line pH, what that's for is that if you're recording extraordinarily loud sound sources and you have a microphone that needs phantom power, but you don't want to amplify it at all, you don't want to add any gain, then you can put it in line with phantom power as an option. So that's what that's for. So line, we're going to go ahead and choose line. And when I do, my knob, let's see here.
Wow, we have like 7 questions.
Okay, so what comes up next, and there is a trim setting. So what I would suggest to the person that asked the question, go into each channel after you've set it to line and make sure that the trim is set to plus minus 0 dB. I suspect that they're set to different levels, and that's why you're getting different levels registering on the different channels. So try that and see what we get. Let's go to the questions in the chat here.
Got a whole bunch.
Whole bunch of questions. Christopher, would you buy the 888 again today? Only reason I have my 8 series is because I need Dante, and Dante is only in the flagship level devices. I would either buy an 888 or an 833 if I were buying today. I don't do any production sound basically at this point. I do, everything we do is in studio for the most part right now. And in studio, we're just using an 833 and it's suiting us just fine. It's doing everything we need it to do. We don't need Dante there. I bought the 888 in 2019. At the time, I was doing a lot more kind of location work, and also at my job at the time, my day job at the time, we would do recordings in the way that the office was set up as an open floor plan. And so all of the conference rooms that we had in that space previously got much smaller because there was this thinking that open floor plans are better for collaboration. So all the conference rooms got really small. So being able to have, even a small crew in the room at the same time that we were filming a talking head became untenable. And so being able to have whoever was mixing sound outside the room connected via Dante to a little box in the room was going to make things easier. So we would just have the interviewer in the room with the person being filmed. So that was part of the motivation. Also, I was hopeful to do larger production jobs. Just my career took a different angle after that, so didn't end up doing a ton of that. But I would probably 833 today is what I would do. But 888 is a fantastic machine, and I have no regrets purchasing it. Okay, I need a recommendation. The prices of the AT875R, MKE600, and NTG4 are near identical in my country. What is the best for both indoor and outdoor booming? Okay, I would automatically and immediately cross the Rode NTG4 off the list. It sounds very thin and kind of mid-rangey to me, not a great sounding mic. The AT875R and the MKE600. The MKE600 is a little bit more bassy than the AT875R, which sounds a little bit more balanced to me. So it depends on what sound you like. I think you probably can't. I think that the MKE600 is a little bit longer, and I think it's slightly more directional than the AT875R. Indoors, I think the AT875R would be the obvious choice, but the MKE600 can work in there as well. But if you do have a really reverberant room, I'd try to treat it in some way, get some blankets down on the floor at the very least, hanging on a C-stand if you can. So if I were going to buy one, I'd probably buy the MKE600. That would be my choice. But the AT875R would be fine too. All right, Fachiri, I'm going to travel for a 20-day gig pretty soon, and I'm thinking of bringing my ore cart as a checked bag. Would you recommend me migrate my gear to a Pelican instead? Absolutely, yes. Yeah, I absolutely would. The ore cart, for those that are not familiar with it, is kind of a semi-hard, kind of little mini cart thing that you can take on set. Yeah, I don't think that's going to provide the protection you need. I would definitely get a Pelican case. Now, remember that your batteries are going to need to go in the cabin, most likely. So, but everything else, certainly your mixer, I would put in a Pelican case. All right, Keith says, had an interesting issue last week. MixPre 3.2 stopped writing time code to files after 3 takes were done. Any insights into that? Nothing immediately off the top of my head, but I wonder if a setting got jostled somehow. If maybe the time is somehow in the time code menu, things got changed to. Let me just pull I've got my MixPre 3 here. We're going to power this up right now. If it somehow in the time code menu, the time code mode got changed to, maybe either HDMI time code or, yeah, I don't know. Keith, I really don't know. I would definitely contact Sound Devices and see what they can provide for you on that. That's not something I've encountered before. All right, Camille, Sennheiser is making the transition from G4 to EWDP. There is no digital version yet for in-ear monitors. Is this a matter of time, or is there something I am overlooking? Well, I don't have any inside information. I haven't talked to anyone at Sennheiser, and even if I had, they would probably have me under non-disclosure. But I haven't talked to anybody at Sennheiser. I would imagine they're probably going to switch to digital at some point. Yeah, I don't know, but I would guess yes. Hi, everyone. Question: I have a MixPre 6.2, and when I record many time, the pre-record and the record time disappears. Huh. Do you mean that the pre-record doesn't get recorded? So in other words, you have it set, let me power my MixPre 3 on again. Depending on all of your sample rate settings and other things, it'll change the amount of pre-record time you have, just so that you're aware. I'm going to assume you already know that. But for example, if I go to the record menu and I change my sample rate to, let's go to 192 kilohertz, the unit has to restart. But the reason I'm doing this is that can change my pre-record time. I just want to make sure that you're fully aware of this reality. So when I set that, my pre-roll time, as they call it on the sound devices, is now 2 seconds. If I'm in 48 kilohertz 24-bit, I believe I get 10 seconds. So that's one thing to check. If you have that checked and you're not getting the pre-record time that you have indicated in the record menu on your MixPre 6.2, then it's probably time to call Sound Devices support and figure out what's going on there. But do note that if you're at a higher sample rate, you're going to get less pre-record time, so it may seem like you're not getting any at all. Let me just go ahead and switch back to 48 kilohertz. I'm at 48 kilohertz 24-bit, and actually I get 5 seconds on the MixPre with the number of channels that I'm recording. So just double check that pre-roll time in the record menu and see what it says. And if you need more pre-roll time, then you might want to see if there's other settings you can change, like your sample rate. All right, Yanti, when do you say no to how much you can do by yourself? Many times the client asks for one thing that's simple, but soon there's 4 channels, lav, boom, drone, vertical shoot, still, etc. That's a great question. And I would say that what you should have is probably a standard price list worked out so that you have prices like standard prices, whether you want to do it by hour or however you choose to price, but for each of those specific things, so that when that conversation comes up, first of all, ideally they've already seen your price list so they know, and number 2, then it becomes a conversation of, sure, we can add some of these. It's going to take more time, and the cost is higher as per the price list, just so you avoid that. I know it's very tempting for, especially for, here's a reality. Smaller budget clients are almost always more demanding. And a lot of times the mindset is, well, since you're here, could you also, because I know you happen to have since we're already paying for you, can you go ahead and do this? So that's why I would be very clear about having a price list for the different services broken out, and make sure your clients see that ahead of time so that you're agreed on the pricing and you're agreed on the services that you're going to provide. That's how I would approach that. That says, hypothetical question, if you could pick any piece of deck to get for free that's less than $15,000, what would you choose? Can you get a Neve console for less than $15,000? I don't think so. Maybe a mini one. Could I get multiple things as long as it adds up to less than $15,000? Because if so, I have some answers there. Number 1, I would get I think it's what's the Sound Devices product? The control surface for the 8 series. I would get that. That is the CL16. So yeah, we can go on the Mac here. So that's this guy right here to go along with my 888. And then I would probably also get the SSL Big 6 desktop mixer. Not because I need it, just because it looks really cool and it probably sounds really cool. Danny's cringing in the corner over here. But do I need either of those things? No, I don't. Not at all. All right, just want to say thank you for all the effort. I would never be able to navigate my way through audio hell without your videos. Waiting for F3 and MKH416 to arrive. Super excited to begin this journey. Well, Orkun, I hope that I hope you have a lot of fun on the journey. It's a lot of fun to record great sound, and it's exciting when you learn just like these really simple things that allow you to capture sound that's every bit as good as you had hoped it would be. So have fun on the journey. Enjoy your F3 and your 416, and can't wait to hear what you produce with that. Vachuri, one last question for today. Would you recommend the Sennheiser EWD SKP or the Shure SLX D3 plug-on system for bag use. I haven't, well, EWD SKP is their higher end, I believe, right? I haven't used that, so I can't really speak to that one. The Shure SLX D3 is kind of the Shure mid-range wireless system. It worked really well. I was really happy with it. But they're not really, it's not, I mean, I don't know what else is in your bag, but it's not the kind of, that's not a slot system. So there's that. And again, I haven't used the Sennheiser, so I can't speak to that. But I can say that just audio quality wise and for the money, what you're getting with the Shure system is actually very good. So if that works with your bag, I have experience with that one and can say I got great results with it. So that's what I can say. Anyone else? Camille, 2 cappuccinos and an apple pie. Thank you so much. Danny and I will surely enjoy that. Cheers. Question, does the MixPre have the 4 gigabyte file size recording limitation? The answer is yes. I'm glad you brought that up, actually. The only recorder that I know of that supports RF64, not that it's the only recorder that does, it's the only one I know of, is the Sound Devices 8 series that supports the RF64. So the Zoom F series recorders are all limited to 4 gigabytes in size. And in fact, I think a lot of them chop them up at 2 gigabytes. So, yeah, just something to keep in mind. So they do have that limitation. Again, some people, I realize it would be more convenient if you could get a single file, but it's also not the end of the world if it splits them up. The MixPre does a very nice job, and I've never had a problem with it skipping samples or anything like that. So literally just slotting them all in a timeline right next to each other has never been a problem for me. Thanks. This channel helps me a lot. Thank you so much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. And wish you all the best there. Wild Ride Films, just don't go buying an MK416 off of eBay. So just for context, for Wild Ride Films, or for whomever here, be careful about buying microphones in particular, it seems like, on eBay that are at dramatically lower prices than you normally see at authorized dealers. And the reason for that is Mark ended up finding out that he had purchased a counterfeit MKH416. Was wondering, gosh, this doesn't sound as amazing as I thought it would. Looked like the real thing. Turns out it was not. So if the deal looks too good to be true, it probably is. When you're going to invest in a quality microphone like the 416, buy it from an authorized dealer and know that even if you see prices that are substantially lower, like hundreds of dollars lower, they're probably not the real thing. Now, I will also say I have noticed over the years that the MKH416 sometimes is sold on specials, even through the authorized dealers, but just make sure you buy it through an authorized dealer so that you make sure that you're getting the real thing. Zircon, I've been looking at digital mixer. Does the Allen Heath SQ5 have enough mic pre-gain for mics like the SM7B used for voice? I believe it supplies 60 dB of gain on the trim, on the gain trim, and then of course the fader you can push a little bit more in there, but yeah, it's not a ton. I actually find that for SM7B, for my voice, certain voices that are not quite, don't project quite as much, I usually like to add about 65 dB of gain to the SM7B. So depends on how you want to look at that. For live use, I think it's probably enough. It's probably enough because it's not the same as when you're recording. I find that you're trying to optimize, often you're trying to kind of keep the fader at unity. You're not necessarily trying to, as a start at least, and then use the faders from there to kind of mix with the rest of everything else. But I don't usually, probably 60 dB is going to be enough. Certainly for singing vocals, I would think under most circumstances, that's going to be enough. Hopefully that helps. All right, Wild Ride Films again. Do you think the Zoom H1E would outperform the Panasonic XLR1's preamps? I like that I don't have to sync with the XLR1, but the 32-bit float is enticing on the H1E. And there's an addition. This is with a 3.5 millimeter cable from the MKE 600. I haven't tested the H1E. I do have the H4E, and I wasn't particularly impressed with the preamps when I had to boost quite a bit in post. So I would probably stick with your XLR one, unless if you're having a lot of problems with clipping audio, then give yourself more headroom. Don't gain up quite so much. That would be my advice. All right. Shoji asks, what SD cards do you use with your Mix Pre? I use... The nice thing about audio recorders, in fact, I have found, is that you don't need the latest, greatest, fastest SD cards. In fact, many of them are not compatible with the latest, greatest, fastest SD cards. This is just a SanDisk Extreme 60 megabytes per second. Oh, actually, this one is only a 16 gigabyte card. UHS 3. It looks like, maybe we can focus it. No, it's my eyes.
It's having a hard time.
It's not, it doesn't want it. In any case, it's a SanDisk Extreme 60 megabytes per second UHS 3 SD card. I believe that Sound Devices does put, maybe they put a card compatibility chart over on their support page. Let's take a look.
We have a lot more questions.
We have a lot more questions. Take a look at Sound Devices support and do a search for compatible SD cards. Should get you what you need.
This is 2 parts.
2 parts. When people buy the first piece of equipment, whether it's audio or video gear, etc., they just buy it because it's cheap, not because they want it. And a couple of months later, they want something else instead of saving up their money to buy the piece of equipment they actually want. Do you agree? Well, sort of. I think a lot of times when we're first getting started, we don't realize what a more expensive piece of gear might provide us that a less expensive piece of gear may not provide us. It's getting more complicated too. In 2024, a lot of the lower end gear is quality-wise, in terms of audio quality, can actually produce very good audio quality. It used to be even, just 10 years ago that the difference in audio quality between something that was at least several $100s or thousands of dollars was substantially different than a $200 or a $300 audio recorder. So nowadays, there are some inexpensive. The Zoom F3 is a brilliant example. Zoom F3 can produce fantastic quality audio. I believe it's a $300 or $350 recorder. And it can produce audio quality that rivals much more expensive audio recorders. But it depends on what you're doing with it. So if you find yourself, hey, I want to become a production sound mixer for video and film, you're going to pretty quickly find that the Zoom F3 is probably not going to be enough inputs. It's going to be kind of difficult to operate very quickly when you're on set. You might just use it as a boom recorder or something like that, or for second unit or something like that. But you're going to find that you outgrow it. And that's the thing is, like, to me, the difference between the Mix Pre and the 8 series recorders isn't about audio quality to a large extent. To me, it's more about all of the other features that you need when you're working professionally. So when you need a lot more outputs, you need balanced outputs, which the Mix Pre 3 and 6 don't provide. When you need much more sophisticated routing capabilities, which the Mix Pre and the Zoom F series recorders don't provide. It's things like that. So if I need to provide a mix to the script supervisor, I need to provide a mix to the director, and maybe a different mix to my boom operator, I need much more sophisticated routing capabilities and I need way more outputs. So also, if I am going to be running a lot of channels of wireless audio, being able to use a slot system where I can get 8 channels of audio into my 888 with just 2 receivers that are connected directly to the mixer, and I don't have to convert from from analog to digital, transmit digital, then back to analog, then back into the mixer, then back to digital. Then that's where the pro level things make a difference. So yeah, and I mean, there are still some cheap things out there that don't sound that great. I'm a little disappointed in the Zoom H4 Essential, or the Essential Handy Recorder series. I feel like they've kind of cheaped out on the preamplifiers there. I would have rather paid a little bit more money to get a very high quality preamp, and it wouldn't have costed that much more, I don't think. They could, I mean, if they're making a Zoom F3, Danny's saying stop talking because I'm just blathering on at this point. Hopefully that helps. Mark, this is a long question. I have an audio job and their mic stand popped throughout the opening segment. I can remove the pops in RX, but only between the speaker. Recommendation for technique to remove pops during speech segment in RX. Yeah, you can use the declick right in the middle of a word if you need to. In fact, that's kind of one of its magical things, but I would spot do it. I wouldn't just apply declick across the entire audio clip. And let me be very clear. That's the declick module. There's also the mouth declick. The mouth declick is a different thing. And the mouth declick, I do normally feel pretty comfortable applying that across an entire clip if I use very, very mild settings. But the nice thing about the declick module, not mouth declick, declick, is you can do it on just this, a very small surrounding area around where the click occurs, and you can go extreme with those settings and see what you can get. I've had pretty good luck with that, so hopefully, Mark, that helps. Hi, May. What is the most accurate way to sync audio and video on a live stream? Can timecode be used with OBS? I don't know of a way to use OBS. The way for me to get things in sync is to send the audio into your camera. And then that way you're not dealing with a sync. Otherwise, just using the good old clap test. So with OBS, make a recording, clap on that recording and the recording, bring that video clip into your video editing app, and then count how many frames there are between the visual clap and the audio clap. The audio clap will usually occur first. Find out how many frames that is, and then do the math to figure out how much of an offset you can apply, and you can apply that in OBS. So we have a video over on our main channel that shows how to do that. So if you look at live stream audio sync, and Curtis Judd, do that search, and that should get you what you need. How's your ambisonic testing in Resolve 19 been going? Abandoned for now, Christopher. It has been abandoned. It was taking a lot of time, and I was not getting the results I wanted. I think it's time to come back to it at another time. It was actually not so much ambisonic as it was specifically Dolby Atmos that I wanted to. Christopher also clarifies the Kantar also does RF64, but unfortunately, Aton is the company that makes the Kantar X3 is no more, and it's even more expensive than an 8 series, so a specialty device. Yes, the Kantar X3 would retail for around $14,000 for an audio recorder. That company, unfortunately, a French-based company, is out of business, sadly, but evidently it also supported RF64. Good to know. Thanks for that. The rest of the story, I actually fixed the crackling in that mic, and it sounds fairly good now. Excellent. That's great news. Nice work, Mark. All right, I recently purchased a pristine Fostex FR2LE to try some stereo field recording. Any recommendations on a nice stereo pair for under $1,000? I was thinking 2 Lewitt LCT 540Ss. I think that's a fine choice. If you're looking for pencil condensers, stereo pair. I don't really know if I do have a good recommendation for that. Hopefully, at some point in the future, I do. We are hoping to test Rycote's pencil condenser mic, at least the super cardioid version here pretty soon, maybe, if we're lucky.
And this is the last one.
This is the last question. Could they use a cloud lifter with the SM7B? Of course. Absolutely. Or a FET head, or any of the thousands of other mic activators, which are really inline preamplifiers. Yep, any of those could work as well. Just kind of clunky. That's the only thing. Okay, friends, whoa, we're way over time. Thank you, Danny. Everyone else, get out there, make some great sound. We'll talk to you again next week.